I was never afraid of clowns. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, where every Halloween was filled with parties, costumes, and of course clowns. They were everywhere, parades, school events, even in the town square. Until that Halloween. The first time I heard about the cursed clown was 3 weeks ago. A friend of mine, Todd, told me about it while we were at the local bar. He swore he saw something strange near the old park, but I figured he was just trying to scare me. The guy looked like he came straight out of a nightmare, he said, his eyes distant, bright red hair, teeth like knives. I laughed, but something in Todd's voice made my skin crawl. That feeling followed me home that night. When I closed my door, I found myself glancing out the window, almost expecting to see something lurking outside. But everything was quiet. Halloween was approaching, and the town streets were already decorated with fake cobwebs and carved pumpkins. On Halloween night, my girlfriend Sarah and I decided to walk down to the town square. The full moon lit our path, and we could hear the laughter and shouts of children running from house to house. Everything felt so normal. Then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, tall, thin, standing under the dim light of a street lamp. He wore an old-fashioned clown costume, the kind you'd see in black and white photos. His frozen smile stretched too wide, revealing sharp teeth that didn't match the comedic makeup. His bright red hair glowed like fire under the light. "Did you see that?" I asked Sarah, who looked at me confused. "See what?" She replied, and when I turned back, the clown was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Nothing. I guess it was just my imagination. We kept walking, but the unease didn't leave me. With every corner we turned, the feeling that we were being followed grew stronger. Finally, I heard laughter. It wasn't normal clown laughter. It was distorted, like a hiss mixed with giggling. I looked around, and there he was again, at the end of the street, watching us. This time, Sarah saw him too. "Let's go home," she said, her voice low and trembling. We quickened our pace, but so did he. Closer. Faster. We ran through the empty streets as that laughter grew louder, coming from every direction. I could smell something sweet like rotting cotton candy. We rounded the corner and reached our apartment. I slammed the door shut, panting, as Sarah began to cry. "What was that?" she asked, but I had no answers. The laughter continued outside, accompanied by slow footsteps. My hands shook as I tried to call the police, but the phone was dead. The power went out soon after, plunging the house into darkness. The only sound was the laughter, now right outside the door. "He's here," I whispered. Without thinking, I grabbed Sarah and dragged her to the kitchen. I locked the door behind us and frantically searched through the drawers, looking for anything to defend ourselves. My fingers found the cold handle of a kitchen knife, and I gripped it tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. In the dark, we tried to calm down, but the laughter didn't stop. It seemed to seep through the walls, as if that damned clown was everywhere at once. Then silence. For a moment, I thought he had left. But when I opened the kitchen door, something yanked me off my feet with terrifying strength. I saw his face up close for the first time. His eyes, empty, black like soulless voids. The smile was even bigger now, as if he was delighted to finally catch me. I screamed and fought back, kicking the clown with everything I had. The knife was still in my hand, and in a desperate move, I slashed at the arm that held me. The clown let out a shriek that echoed through the house. I took the opportunity and pulled Sarah, but in the process, he grabbed her. Her scream of terror sliced through the air, and without thinking, I rushed back to her. The clown wrapped his arm around Sarah's neck, his smile nearly pressed against her cheek. The sickly sweet smell of death filled the room. With one final effort, I raised the knife and drove it deep into his arm. The clown recoiled, screaming again, his laughter now twisted into something grotesque. I managed to pull Sarah away from him, and we bolted into the street, never looking back. We reached the edge of town, breathless, speechless. I looked at Sarah, but something was wrong. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on me, but empty. "Sarah," I called, shaking her. No response. We lost something that night. I pulled her away from him, but somehow, he took her anyway. Since then, Sarah hasn't been the same. She sits in silence, staring out the window with an empty smile on her face. as if she still hears the clown's laughter echoing in the distance. And me? I know he's still out there, waiting. I always knew my grandfather, Arthur, had his secrets, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found. After his death, I inherited only a few things: a pocket watch, some faded photographs, and an old journal he had never mentioned. I had always imagined that if he had anything important to pass on, it would have been in his will. Yet, there was the journal, hidden under a pile of old clothes at the back of his closet, as if waiting for me. The journal was odd from the moment I laid eyes on it. The yellowed pages had that familiar musty scent of old things, and the leather cover was so worn it seemed to have survived decades of handling. I started flipping through it, not expecting much at first, but soon something caught my attention. In the middle of the pages, there were drawings. Clowns. Not the cartoonish, creepy ones you see in horror movies, but figures of strange, magical beauty. Each drawing was intricately detailed, and the clowns appeared almost ethereal. Their costumes were vibrant, as if the invisible ink still shimmered, but there was something deeply unsettling about them. Their features were too perfect, almost angelic, but out of proportion, just subtly enough to evoke discomfort. Their smiles were wide, but their eyes had no soul. I was mesmerized by those images, unable to look away. Each new drawing revealed a different clown, each with a distinct aura. They seemed alive in some way, ready to leap off the pages. But as I kept flipping through, I realized there was more to this journal. In between the drawings, there was a story, and from the first words, I knew it was about my grandfather. The initial entries were vague, talking about his childhood in a small town. But everything changed when he described the arrival of a circus. The tone of his writing grew tense, more urgent, as if recalling those memories tormented him.
The circus came to town in the spring, like a storm of colors and sounds. I was 10 years old and had never seen anything like it. Posters went up all over town: Twilight Circus, an unforgettable experience. Everyone was talking about it. My parents, like all the other adults, were excited by the promise of a spectacle like no other. Neighbors gathered on street corners to discuss the attractions, exotic animals, daring acrobats, and, of course, the clowns. Always the clowns. I remember the moment we entered the big top. I felt an overwhelming sense of joy. It was magical, more than I could understand at the time. The lights glowed with an almost otherworldly brightness, the music floated through the air like a spell, and the people around me seemed utterly captivated. At first, everything was wonderful. The trapeze artists flew through the air, lions jumped through flaming hoops, and the clowns made the audience laugh until their stomachs hurt. But something was wrong. Even at that age, I could feel it. There was an energy in the air, something that made me uneasy, like something was out of place. I didn't realize what it was until I saw the distant tent. It was a huge structure, hidden in the back of the circus, almost as if it wasn't meant to be seen. The fabric of the tent was old, dirty, and patched together, a shadow compared to the vibrant colors of the main tent. I got curious. A child's curiosity can be dangerous, but that night, I ventured further than I should have. I told my parents I was going to get popcorn and snuck out of the big top. When no one was looking, I made my way toward the solitary tent. Each step I took felt harder, as though the air around it was heavier, denser. There was a feeling of anticipation in the air, as if something was waiting for me. When I reached the entrance, I felt a chill. The tent's curtains were slightly parted, and a faint light glowed from within. Against all instincts, I pulled back the curtain and stepped inside. What I saw still haunts me. The people, they were there, standing in rows, staring forward with blank expressions like puppets. Their faces were devoid of emotion, as if their souls had been drained. And surrounding them were the clowns, but these weren't the clowns from the show. They were different. Horrific. Their faces were stretched into grotesque smiles, and their eyes were like black holes that sucked in any light. But it wasn't just that. They were feeding on something from the people. The light flowing out of them, the life, the energy, was being drained by those monsters. I didn't know what to do. I stood frozen, watching that scene, unable to move or scream. Then I saw him. The leader. He was bigger, more imposing than the others. He wore a filthy top hat, and his skin was pale, too pale, like he had been there for centuries. His eyes weren't like the other clowns. They were aware. He saw me. Time stopped. He smiled, a smile that made my stomach churn, and took a step toward me. "Don't worry. It'll be your turn soon," he said, in a voice both soft and terrifying. I don't know how, but I managed to move. I ran out of that tent without looking back. I returned to my seat in the big top, and no one seemed to notice I had been gone. The show went on, people laughed, but I knew something was terribly wrong. They were out there, and they knew I had seen them.
I closed the journal, feeling the weight of my grandfather's words pressing down on me. He spent the rest of his life waiting for those clowns to come for him. Whenever something went wrong, whenever he got sick or tired, he believed his turn was coming. Now it all made sense. The nights he woke up screaming, the times he seemed lost in thought, staring at nothing, as if expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. He carried that terror with him his entire life. It makes me wonder if my grandfather really died of natural causes, or if, at long last, his turn finally came. Megan, Tommy, and Ashley walked side by side, laughing and commenting on the over-the-top decorations of Dark Park. They were excited for the last attraction of the night, the famous haunted house, where everyone said fear was guaranteed. Although they were already tired after hours of exploring the park, the promise of an intense experience made them hesitate. "Ready for the biggest scare of the night?" Tommy asked with a challenging smile. "I just want to see if it's as scary as they say," Megan replied, tucking her blonde hair behind her ear. "I bet it's all cheap theatrics." "Don't say that until we get out of there," Ashley warned, glancing at the dark and mysterious entrance of the house. As soon as they crossed the threshold, they were enveloped by a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The lights flickered, the smell of mold filled the air, and strange sounds echoed around them. Unlike the previous attractions, there were no screams from other visitors. Everything felt more isolated, more claustrophobic. The first rooms of the haunted house were relatively normal, with fake cobwebs, ragged dolls, and distorted mirrors. Megan rolled her eyes at the obvious attempts to scare them, while Tommy and Ashley teased each other, competing to see who would get the most frightened. But in one of the rooms, things started to change. They entered a hall larger than expected. The air was heavier, as if charged with something invisible yet threatening. In the center, a worn brown leather chair sat under a dim light, and the silence was suffocating. There was something wrong with that room. Something in the smell, a mix of rust and rotting sweetness, filled the air. "Now, this is scary," Ashley whispered, unsettled. "Oh, come on, guys. This is just theatrics," Tommy said, looking unfazed. Tommy, as always, was the first to act. He approached the chair with a confident smile, ready to mock the scene. When he reached out and touched the arm of the chair, the silence was shattered by a deep, resonant creak echoing through the walls. Suddenly, one of the walls next to them opened, revealing a narrow corridor. The cold air that came from inside made all three shiver. "Okay, this is new," Megan said, feeling uncomfortable for the first time. "What are we waiting for? Let's go." Tommy led the way down the corridor, with Megan and Ashley following reluctantly. As they moved forward, the corridor branched into several passages, like an endless maze. It was impossible to tell where they had come from. Every time they chose a direction, another fork appeared, and with each step, the atmosphere grew more oppressive, until they heard footsteps, but they weren't their own. "Did you hear that?" Ashley whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Megan replied, suddenly stopping. Tommy looked around, trying to identify the source of the sounds, when suddenly laughter echoed through the corridors. A distorted, low laugh, followed by the sound of metal scraping against the floor. They exchanged glances, their hearts racing in unison. "Let's go back," Megan suggested, her voice firm. Before they could move, a figure appeared ahead. A clown. He wore traditional clothes, baggy, colorful pants, a voluminous, stained shirt, and a white mask with a wide, painted smile. His eyes, however, were not part of the costume. They were cold and empty, as if life had been ripped from them long ago. "Run!" Tommy shouted, grabbing Megan's and Ashley's hands and pulling them down the corridor. The clown began to follow them, his heavy footsteps echoing like thunder in the halls. But soon they realized there was no obvious exit. Each new path led them to more dead ends, to more disconnected passages. The chase felt endless, and the clown's macabre laughter accompanied them at every turn. Megan felt the sweat trickling down her neck, her breath hitching in a growing panic. They passed rooms filled with rusty cages and dried bloodstains on the walls. There were old clothes scattered on the floor, some still stained with something they preferred not to identify. In a moment of desperation, Tommy shoved open a side door, and the three of them entered a small room. They locked the door behind them, heavy and gasping breaths filling the space. "What was that?" Megan asked, trying to process what they had just seen. "I don't know, but it's not human," Ashley replied, looking around frantically for an exit. Before they could think of anything, they heard the creak of the door. The clown was near. They backed against a wall, but it was in vain. The clown burst through the door with force and advanced toward them. He grabbed Tommy first, lifting him off the ground like a doll. Megan and Ashley screamed, helpless to do anything, as the clown looked directly into Tommy's eyes, and something changed. The clown's body began to tremble, and a dense, almost black aura started to envelop him. Megan watched in horror as Tommy's body contorted, struggling to break free, but it was futile. The malevolent entity was transferring to him, occupying every part of his being. When it was over, the original clown lay lifeless on the ground, and Tommy stood there, wearing the same grotesque smile on his face, but his eyes pleaded for help. "Tommy," Ashley whispered, but the clown's smile widened, distorting the familiar face of her friend. Before they could react, Tommy, now controlled by the entity, attacked the two. He had no control over his own body, but he was aware, seeing everything, unable to stop what was happening. He was forced to raise the knife and strike at his friends. The last image of Tommy, before everything faded to darkness for Megan and Ashley, was him sitting in the leather chair, hands in his lap, a manic smile on his face and tears streaming down his cheeks. He cried silently, unable to break free from the curse that now controlled his existence. Now he was the new clown,